On a damp morning in early August, in the quiet little town of Maple Hollow, tucked deep within the heart of Virginia, a black man stepped out of an old pickup truck. He wore a plaid shirt, faded jeans, and a pair of worn-out sneakers. No one recognized him as Marcus Ellison, the newly appointed chief of police. He wore no name tag, no uniform, and had no escort. Marcus hadn't come to be welcomed. He had come to see the raw, unfiltered truth of the department he was about to lead, a place rumored to be steeped in arrogance, discrimination, and a deep lack of respect. Marcus Ellison was not the kind of man drawn to fanfare. He believed in watching people when they weren't being distorted by the gaze of authority. That's why, on that morning, he walked into the Maple Hollow Police Department without a single marker of who he really was. Faded plaid shirt, wrinkled jeans, scuffed sneakers. He could have been mistaken for a homeless man looking for shelter. That was the point. In his mind, there was no room for hollow greetings or rehearsed handshakes. He needed the truth. And truth only reveals itself when people believe no one important is watching. The station's parking lot was as packed as any other morning. Laughter and idle chatter echoed from a group of officers near the rear of a patrol car, swapping half-stories and deadpan jokes. A few glanced his way as he crossed the lot. Quick, dismissive looks, tinged with quiet judgment. No one greeted him. No one asked who he was. No one realized they were looking at the newly appointed chief of police, announced just days earlier. Marcus drew a deep breath. The crisp morning air was tainted by the scent of warm car tires and cheap coffee drifting from an upstairs window. His steps were slow, deliberate, like a man walking into a maze, uncertain if he'd find his way back out whole. But he had to walk, had to see, had to know. Because this place, this department, had been allowed to live in the dark for far too long. He was standing near the break room, where the sterile glow of a flickering neon light cast a cold, white sheen across the polished tile floor, when a sharp voice suddenly cut through his thoughts from behind. "Hey, you! This isn't a homeless shelter!" Marcus turned around. A white officer with a sneer in his eyes was walking toward him. The nameplate on his Navy uniform read clearly, Officer Blake. Behind him were three others, also in uniform, arms crossed, leaning against the wall like spectators at a show they'd seen a dozen times and still couldn't get enough of. Marcus hadn't even spoken yet when Blake continued, his voice a mix of command and condescension. "You lost or something? This isn't a place for drifters. If you're looking for shelter, the bus station's got a roof." The words sliced through the air like a cold, sharp blade. Behind Blake, the others chuckled, openly now. The kind of laughter that doesn't just mock, it savors the humiliation. One of them slapped a hand on the table and muttered with a smirk, "Another wannabe hero." Marcus felt his jaw clench, but his face remained still, composed. He'd been here before, countless times. The stares, the judgment, the casual cruelty. But today was different. Today he had to endure, because he had to see. He had to look the rot in the eye, if he ever hoped to cut it out. "You deaf or something?" Blake stepped in close, too close, inches away now. "I said get the hell out of here." And then, with the full audience of his laughing peers, and with a smirk twisted in triumph, Blake spit, a warm glob of saliva, landing square on Marcus's cheek. Time froze. The spit slid slowly down his face as laughter erupted behind Blake like applause after a show-stopping act. One officer leaned in and taunted, "Show him who really runs this place." Marcus didn't flinch. He reached into his back pocket, pulled out a crisp white handkerchief, and wiped his face, slowly, deliberately, with a composure that screamed louder than any outburst ever could. He looked up and locked eyes with Blake, his voice low, every syllable razor-sharp. "Is this how you treat everyone who walks through the doors of this department?" Blake sneered. "Just the ones who don't belong here." Marcus nodded slightly. His eyes narrowed, cold, calculating. The game had just begun. Just minutes after the spitting incident, the intercom crackled to life with a familiar voice. "All personnel, report to the briefing room in 10 minutes. Marcus said nothing. He turned silently and walked away, leaving behind a trail of smug chuckles. Blake stood there, still basking in his little victory, as if he were a fox that had just caught the scent of blood. He had no idea that the ground beneath him was about to crack open, an earthquake slowly building beneath his feet. The briefing room was packed, chipped coffee mugs, chairs scraping the floor, the usual morning banter and mindless gossip. Business as usual. No one noticed the man in plain clothes standing in the shadows, holding a folder stamped with the Maple Hollow Police Department crest. Blake sat near the back, arms crossed, one leg lazily thrown over the other. His eyes still sparkled from what he thought was a master class in humiliation. He glanced around, trying to spot Marcus, then shook his head in smug contempt, like the world itself was beneath him. Then from the front of the room, Captain Willard's voice snapped the air like a whip. "I know many of you have been wondering who would fill the chief's seat after McBride's retirement. Today we officially welcome his successor." A ripple of mild curiosity swept the room. Eyes scanned for the usual suspect, a clean-cut man in a tailored suit, graying at the temples, carrying decades of bureaucracy in his step. No one was ready for the sound of steady, confident footsteps emerging from the side door. Marcus Ellison walked in, holding the folder, his head held high. In the moment, he reached the front of the room. Shock rippled through the rows like lightning. Blake froze. His eyes went wide, a deer in the headlights of his worst nightmare. Others stiffened. Some exchanged sharp glances. A few swallowed hard. You could hear the collective ego of the room take a gut punch. Marcus took his place at the podium. His voice was calm, deep, and full of quiet authority. "Good morning. I'm Marcus Ellison. As of today, I'm your new chief of police." Silence. No coffee being poured, no pens scratching paper. Just stunned, unmoving faces trying to reassemble their composure. Blake sat like a statue, his skin drained of color. Gone was the cocky, condescending man from earlier. All that remained was someone staring straight into the mirror of his own truth. Marcus paused, his eyes slowly sweeping the room, reading every face like an open book. Then he spoke again, soft, measured, but with a blade underneath every word. "I came here this morning in ordinary clothes, not to test you, but to see who you really are." And just like that, every mask in the room cracked, just a little. Marcus stood firm behind the podium, silent for a few breaths, as if even the air itself needed time to absorb the truth that had just been laid bare. His eyes swept the room, scanning faces that only moments ago brimmed with smug confidence, now fading into a quiet storm of confusion and unease. "Maybe," he began, voice steady, "some of you expected me to walk in with a rehearsed speech, a stiff suit, and a smile made for photographs. But I didn't come here to perform.
I came to listen, and this morning I did." A ripple of murmurs stirred, but Marcus lifted one hand. The room snapped back to silence, thick and unforgiving. "In just a few minutes among you, I witnessed something that any community would find unacceptable. Disrespect, contempt, and the silent complicity that lets them thrive." He paused, letting his words hang heavy.
His sharp brown eyes cut through the room like a scalpel until they landed on the back row, where Officer Blake sat frozen, bracing against the chair as if standing up might shatter him. "Blake!" Marcus called. The name didn't need to be shouted. It struck the walls and bounced back, hitting every chest like a hammer. Blake looked up, wide-eyed, like a child caught red-handed. I didn't know," he stammered. "Exactly," Marcus cut in, voice like steel. "You didn't know. And worse, you didn't care. You didn't care who I was. To you, my skin and my clothes were enough to decide I wasn't worth your respect." Outside the window, the wind had picked up. Inside, the room was locked in stasis. Marcus stepped down from the podium. His footsteps were deliberate, each one driving into the collective ego of a department too long coddled by comfort and unchecked power. He stopped just short of Blake. "When you spat in my face," Marcus said, voice cold and razor-sharp, "you didn't just disgrace me. You spat on the badge you wear, on the oath you swore. You became a walking emblem of the culture that's been eating away at everything we're supposed to stand for." Silence. Total. So quiet, you could hear someone drop a pen and feel the weight of it hit the floor. "I am placing Officer Blake on immediate suspension," Marcus said, turning back to face the room. "There will be a full internal investigation. And let me be clear. This is not a gesture. This is a wake-up call." A whisper, "Oh God," escaped from the corner of the room. Blake hung his head. His face flushed crimson, then drained to ash. Marcus returned to the front, inhaled deeply, and delivered his final words with the unshakable tone of someone who had seen fire and chosen to become it. "If you're here to wear the badge but not the integrity, leave now. But if you're ready to become someone this community can believe in again, I will stand with you all the way." Not a soul moved. Not a breath dared break the silence. Blake stood up. He didn't look at anyone. He just walked out. And behind him, he didn't just leave shame. He left the end of an era. One of silence, one of rot, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of something real. The next day, a strange stillness hung over the precinct like a low fog. No loud laughter. No casual banter. Footsteps grew softer, as if the whole building were holding its breath, unsure of the storm that had passed, or the one still coming. Marcus sat in his new office. Glass walls, modest size, nothing fancy, but just enough for him to hear every sound outside. On his desk lay a mountain of old case files he'd requested the night before. Every complaint, every report, every internal memo related to Officer Blake. Not a detail spared. He read them slowly, not like a detective chasing a crime, but like a doctor tracing symptoms of a deeper disease. The papers didn't just document misconduct. They told the story of a system that had stopped fighting, of colleagues who stayed silent to avoid trouble, of superiors who closed their eyes to keep the peace. It wasn't one man's failure. It was the shadow of resignation. And Marcus knew. He couldn't fix this with policies or press conferences. He had to start from the most human place of all, conversation. He didn't summon people to the conference room. He walked to their desks, knocked lightly, smiled. "Got a minute?" Some avoided his eyes. Some suddenly looked busy. But some, strangely beautifully, looked straight at him, hesitant, but not hiding. Maria Lopez was one of them, a young officer, 2 years on the job. When Marcus asked her what it was like working here, she went quiet for a long moment. Then, voice trembling, she said, I've seen Blake talk like that to people of color, but I stayed quiet. I was scared if I said something, I'd be pushed out." Marcus didn't scold her, didn't shame her. He rested a hand gently on the edge of her desk, his voice soft, not weak, but steady, like water carving through stone. Maria, change doesn't come from being perfect. It comes from being brave. And you just took the first step. Her eyes welled, but something in her chest loosened. Not everyone opened up like Maria. Some denied there was even a problem. Some fumbled, unsure, and asked with a mix of fear and defiance, "So what now? We got to be scared of every word we say?" Marcus didn't dodge the hard ones. He met them head on. No, you don't need to fear saying the wrong thing. You just need to care when you're doing the wrong thing, and have the guts to fix it. Day after day, Marcus walked the building. The locker rooms, the old archive basement, the overnight watch stations, like an archaeologist digging through layers of neglect, where truth had been buried under time, dust, and indifference. He didn't make noise. He didn't make speeches. He planted small seeds of trust, of truth, of reckoning. And though they were nearly invisible now, they were real. And they were growing, strong enough to one day break through the hardened ground. News of the incident between Marcus and Officer Blake tore through Maple Hollow like a summer storm. At every coffee shop, every corner store, the same story buzzed like static on a radio. The new black chief got spit on by one of the old guys, then turned the whole thing on its head. In a town as small as this, it wasn't just a headline. It was a reckoning. The whispers started with suspicion, then curiosity, and slowly, inevitably, respect. Marcus didn't hold a press conference, didn't smile for cameras or drop into prime time. Instead, he went where real trust lives, into church basements, school libraries, weekend park gatherings. He sat down beside people, listened as parents spoke of calling the police in fear instead of faith, listened as teenagers told stories of being stopped just for walking home in hoodies, listened to stories soaked in exhaustion, pain, and resignation. One afternoon, at the town's autumn festival in the Central Park, Marcus strolled past the food stands and music tents when a small voice called out. A boy, maybe 8 years old, eyes wide, ran up and hesitated. "Are you really the chief?" Marcus knelt, meeting him eye to eye, smile soft, like the morning sun. "Yes, I'm the one in charge of the police here." The boy frowned, then whispered so quietly Marcus had to lean in. "My dad says the police don't care about people like us." Something in Marcus's chest tightened. He paused, then gently placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, voice warm as a promise. "Maybe that used to be true. But starting today, if anything ever happens, you come find me, okay?" The boy's eyes lit up, not with full belief, not yet, but with a flicker of hope. And sometimes a flicker is all it takes to ignite something powerful. Back at the station, the ripple of change began to show. Blake filed an appeal. It was denied. His record, once quietly buried under bureaucracy, was now laid bare, page after page of old complaints long ignored. The department had no more places to hide. Some officers couldn't adjust. They left, but those who stayed began to shift. They started noticing how they spoke, how they listened, how they looked at a scruffy kid asking for directions, or a tired mother calling for help at midnight. No, not everyone changed overnight, but Marcus knew. Change isn't about speed, it's about direction. One late afternoon, Marcus stood by the large glass window in the main corridor, watching as officers clocked out. Laughter echoed down the hall, not sharp, mocking laughter like his first day, but real laughter. Warm, human. It came from people who were starting to remember what it meant to be on the same side. Not perfect, not saints. But, for the first time, people who wanted to be better. And in the quiet of that moment, Marcus knew. This wasn't the end of the story. This was the beginning. No one ever said change was easy. It hurts. It reopens wounds we've tried to forget. It forces us to look in the mirror, not just as officers or co-workers or neighbors, but as human beings. But sometimes, to let the light in, we have to break down the walls we've lived behind for too long. Marcus Ellison didn't come to Maple Hollow to be a hero. He came with one simple, radical goal: to bring back respect to a place that should have never lost it in the first place. And he knew that kind of change couldn't be written into policy. It had to be felt. Started from the heart, with courage, with listening, and with a quiet reminder whispered into every hallway: every person who walks through this door, badge or no badge, deserves to be treated with dignity. And you know what? This story isn't just about one police department. It's about every organization, every community, every person who's ever stayed silent in the face of wrong and is now ready to find their voice again. So what about you? Where are you living? Is your community changing? Is there someone like Marcus where you are? Someone brave enough to stand when everyone else stays seated? Drop a comment below and tell us where you're from. Share your thoughts, your hopes, your stories. And if you believe the world needs more people like Marcus, hit like, subscribe. Let's keep telling these stories. Let's keep shining a light where it's needed most. Because real change doesn't start with a crowd. It starts with one person who dares to choose what's right, even when the whole room chooses wrong.